Hey there, it's Tom Jordan. Nice to have you on the program today. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Tom Jordan Live. Got a question for parents. Are you aware of what your kids are being taught in school? There's a new foundation that's out there shedding a whole lot of light on the radical hijacking of ethnic studies in schools, exposing how critical race theory is creeping into classrooms under the guise of liberated ethnic studies. And the lessons are really what they do is they divide the students into oppressors and the oppressed, fueling, as you would imagine, resentment instead of unity amongst the student body. And obviously, we've been seeing this play out throughout the American society over the past several years. There's something called now the THINC Foundation, is THINC, the THINC Foundation, and they are stepping up. They're taking charge on this, and they're championing the values of equality, like real equality and character-based judgment that people like Martin Luther King Jr. Really advocated and envisioned. We're all familiar with his I Have a Dream speech, and these are the principles that are overwhelmingly supported by parents. You got to replace these divisive ideologies with actual, inclusive, and fact based education that celebrates our shared American identity. What do we unite around? That's how America was founded, and that is what makes the United States of America united. So it is time, I think, for parents to reject the indoctrination in their schools, but they got to understand what's being taught first before they can reject it. They got to take back control of their children's education. I'm going to get into this in a few seconds with my guest today, Mitch Siegler. He is the founder and the CEO of the THINC Foundation. Interesting studies, interesting work that they are doing there. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Also, just a reminder, chime in, comment. You can ask questions in the comment sections. I'll get to those in a moment. In fact, you could ask my guest today, Mitch Siegler, a question if you'd like as well. We'll have him answer those for you, in addition to myself. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe, click that notification bell, share the content, the videos. That helps us out tremendously. It's all free of charge. So whatever you can do to help share our content helps us out a whole lot. Thanks so much. Okay, if parents knew what liberated ethnic studies really meant, school boards would be swamped with protests, no question about it. And the issue with liberated ethnic studies is this, that ethnic studies in many schools have been overtaken by an agenda-driven framework that emphasizes division and casting some students as oppressors and others as oppressed based on their what? Their race, their skin color, or their ethnicity. And, you look at Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision, at what he stated back when he was a champion of civil rights in this country, and particularly for his cause for African Americans. What did that look like? All of that is at risk. And because parents overwhelmingly support MLK Jr.'s principle of judging people by their character, not their skin color. Yet it's all been reversed, obviously. I mean, the character is what matters here, yet these liberated ethnic studies undermine this vision by rejecting the concept of color blindness and equality. You probably heard that color blindness is racism, that you're not acknowledging and pointing out and emphasizing a person's skin color. And so that's what these programs are pushing. Critical race theory is just under the radar, but this is what critical race theory is. And by the way, there's people who have criticized me for criticizing critical race theory as if what I'm criticizing is any push against racism. No, critical race theory is in fact racism in subtle disguise. I think it's pretty obvious. Those who look at and study what CRT really is, they can see objectively what definitionally critical race theory represents. It represents racism, and it's in your face. So teaching children that societal structures are inherently oppressive and racially biased creates this victimhood mentality. And we saw Representative Jamal Bowman come out yesterday because a white person wasn't convicted based on his skin color yesterday, that somehow that's white supremacy. And it's not. You're not looking objectively at the case. Somebody trying to kill a metro full of people inside who happens to be black, but that's not why he was held back. It was because he was threatening to kill a large group of people. And this is the Daniel Penny case. I'm sure you're familiar with it. But many parents, here's the thing that's happening in these schools. Many parents have no idea what is being taught. We've tried to talk about this for a few years now. I have on the various programs I've been a part of. But again, many parents still don't understand what CRT is. It sounds good on the surface, but it is of a divisive curriculum. And it's all linked to hostility among students and even the rise of militant movements that we have seen, violent riots. And then you look at these anti Israel protests and the heightened anti Semitism on campuses. I'm going to get into that after my interview today with my guest, Mitch Siegler with the THINC Foundation. But there's this survey they put out, the THINC Foundation did, and it reveals that 93% of parents agree with teaching character based equality, and 81% support color blindness. The majority want ethnic studies rooted in shared values, not identity politics. So let's get into this with Mitch Siegler. He is the founder and the CEO of the THINC Foundation. Mr. Siegler, it's so nice to have you. Thank you for what you're doing. I'm thrilled that you founded this great organization.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me. There's a real problem out there, as you've been saying, and we wanted
Yeah.
to stand up and do something about it.
Yeah, and it is very divisive, but it's also disguised as something that it is not. Because I think the vast majority, as your own studies have shown, that the majority of Americans and parents, people in this country, regardless of their skin color, support fighting against true racism. In other words, judging a person based on their skin color. Most people don't agree with that. Yet we're told the opposite in these lessons that are being taught in schools, also in corporate America, in our government as well. That actually most people of a certain skin color are inherently racist. So can you expound on that a little bit? I mean, the whole premise of you founding the THINC Foundation is based on this ideology that has permeated pretty much every institution in this country. Can you kind of explain that, the premise of your organization?
Well, let's take it back to values that many of us were probably raised with. When I grew up around the kitchen table, we talked about things like America is a land of opportunity. America is a place where if you work hard and you get an education, anything is possible. We should treat others as we would like to be treated. We should be colorblind. Basic common sense kitchen table kind of values. And in the 60s, college professors out of the social sciences departments developed this concept of ethnic studies, which foundationally is fine. The idea that you should understand my ethnic background and my family's history, and I should understand yours, and uh, that builds greater cohesion and that builds community. And through that, we have a stronger, more pluralistic society because America is a melting pot. We all know that. We acknowledge that. We all, first, second, third, some generation immigrants in our experience, and unless we're Native Americans. And what happened is that this concept has been hijacked by a radical fringe group, which wants guide children as young as kindergarten and first grade into oppressor or oppressed categories depending on their skin color. So if you are white or so called white adjacent, uh, they will characterize you as an oppressor. And if you are a black or brown child, they will characterize you as an oppressed. And if you are an oppressor, well, you don't really deserve your success, even if you work hard, study hard, do your very best, because you had an unfair advantage. And if you're an oppressed and you don't succeed, well, that's not your fault either. You couldn't really succeed because you've been held back, your family's been held back by virtue of your skin color. It doesn't really hold up to scrutiny because there are so many exceptions to that. There are people who have multiple identities. There are Asian kids, and Asians, notwithstanding their extraordinary discrimination in this country from the from the labor practices on the railroads in the 1800s when the Chinese immigrants helped to build the railroads, to the Japanese internment camps, uh, Cambodian Vietnamese boat people. The Asian community is not a monolith. They've been discriminated against. So how, by virtue of their success, and Asians from an income and a wealth perspective are among the top performing groups in American society, they're deemed to be oppressors because of the success. Same with Hindu Americans, Indian Americans. Same with Jewish Americans. With a long, millennia long history of oppression. So it's just fundamentally false. It's built on lies. It's a derivative of a Marxist ideology. It's developed in secret. Parents don't like it. And we're standing up to shine sunlight on it.
I'm glad you are. And you're right, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny because it turns out, and I was surprised to learn this as well, based on all the rhetoric out there, that the most successful demographic in the United States happens to be an African American group, the country of Nigeria. Nigerians in the United States are the most successful when you look at their income, you look at their degrees that they've achieved, and it's solely based not on their skin color, but the expectations in their culture. Their society is excellence. Like you have to get there. It's in the family structure of Nigeria. So that was shocking to me, and that totally gets rid of the whole idea that it's all success is all based on the color of your skin, because, as you probably know, Nigerians are African American. They're black, so that shows the whole argument to the side as well. But we're not paying attention to that. So, and especially when we have these liberated ethnic study programs in the school. So, based on your research, your studies, how prevalent are the liberated ethnic study programs in our school? Is it in every school in this country? Is it the majority, K through 12? We're talking about specifically here.
Well, that's a great question, Tom. And the answer is uh, nobody quite knows for sure. We live in California. California is the birthplace of this stuff. It's taken root in a lot of schools, not all, but I think we have in the state of California in excess of 1,000 public school districts, plus independent schools, plus charter schools. So there are a lot of schools. And each school district, each school board basically makes its own decisions about the curricula. Um, and each teacher really can bring whatever he or she wants into the classroom. So when you don't have proper guardrails, it's the Wild West and anything goes. And this movement has spread to the state of Washington and Oregon. It's in Colorado. It's in Minnesota. It's in certain school districts in the Northeast in New York and Vermont. It's in Massachusetts. It's even popped up in a few places in Texas, and there are versions of it. It's a continuum, so it's not all or nothing. There are elements of it that are being taught in certain places as well. A few states have rules and regulations and guardrails about what can be taught. Some states are mandating the teaching of ethnic studies, but I think those states, when they came out with the concept, they never intended that it would be taken off the rails in quite this radical and activist of a way.
Mm.
So it is something that we think requires awareness, it requires education. We're trying to bring more attention to it because ultimately it's the parents that have to stand up for their kids and their communities and their local schools and say, this is not what we believe. This is not what we signed on for. You should not be developing these curricula in secret in dark smoke filled rooms. Parents should be able to see what their kids are being taught. We saw that during the pandemic. Parents were horrified when they looked over the kids' Zoom screen about what they were learning and
Hmm.
not learning. And the same kind of thing is happening with this liberated ethnic studies movement. So if we
Yes.
allow radical activists, teachers' unions, others, politically motivated, ideologically driven people to spoon feed a radical ideology to children and not create diversity of thought in the classroom and not teach children how to think for themselves, but simply regurgitate what someone else is telling them to believe, That's unhealthy in the classroom. That's fundamentally unhealthy when the kids go back home and become adults and join their communities and become the future leaders.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. My wife and my wife particularly is very involved in understanding the school districts in our area. And I spent the vast majority of my life out there in California, San Diego, for decades in San Diego. And we left that, most of my viewers and listeners understand this about me. We left San Diego in 2013 early on, specifically. I mean, the red line was the schools and what they were teaching our kids. And as my kids were going through the San Diego Unified School District, I think actually at that point they were in San Marcos, but regardless, it was happening all over the place out there. We said we got to move to somewhere in the Midwest, so we moved to Michigan, and now we find out that Michigan, the schools now, in terms of what they are teaching, is far beyond what they were teaching in California in 2013 in terms of how far left progressively they have become. And so I just feel like it's permeated throughout the entire country, at least in most states. What is, I mean, based on your studies, I mean, how many parents are aware of what this is teaching? Is there a percentage to this? Is it like 60%, 30% that parents really understand what their kids are being taught? And if they don't understand what their kids are being taught, why is that the case?
Well, it's a great question. I'm also in San Diego, and my kids
Oh,
started off in the San Diego Unified School District, um, and it's representative of so many school districts today. Where if you look at the common sense metrics and you say, what do I want from my neighborhood school, my kids' school? Well, I want proficiency in English, reading, math. I want proper graduation rates. I want the after school activities, music and art that we all grew up with. I want the buildings to be in reasonable shape. And instead, we have declining test scores, declining proficiencies, declining graduation rates in many schools. We have crumbling infrastructure, budget pressures that are causing many of these initiatives to be canceled or reduced dramatically. And meanwhile, there's this distraction. There's this movement that basically says, don't look at those metrics. Those aren't the key metrics. Look at what we're doing to teach their version of cultural awareness. This liberated teaching kids to be activists version of studies. So the research that we conducted, and we THINC Foundation completed a survey of nearly 1,500 parents, statistically significant national survey, urban, suburban, rural, all 50 states, people of various education levels and income levels. So you can slice it and dice it and look at the data from a lot of different directions. We found that super majorities of parents, we're talking 80, 90%, believe in common sense things. America should follow Martin Luther King Jr.'s maxim and judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That we should be a colorblind society. That we should not bring politics and ideology into the classroom. That curricula should be developed in a transparent fashion. Parents should be able to see it. I mean, basic stuff that most people ought to agree upon, and 80 to 90% do. And 70% say, sure, it's fine. Let's teach a baseline version of ethnic studies that creates greater empathy and awareness between ethnic groups. We're a melting pot. Makes sure, let's do it. But only 40%, half as many, less than half as many, support this liberated ethnic studies. And when you peel the onion back and you find that 35% of the people surveyed don't know what it is because it's so slippery. It's not really 40% at all. It's in the mid 20s. So 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5 people oppose that liberated ethnic studies thing. A lot don't understand it. A small fringe advocate for it, and most of the power pushing it is coming from more activist types, including the teachers' unions.
you know, you mentioned the issue of color blindness and Martin Luther King Jr., and this is what he was advocating for. And we've seen now in recent years, particularly as you mentioned in 2020, how That aspect of racism or being colorblind, the narrative now is that color blindness is now another form of racism, that you actually have to emphasize the color of a person's skin. And I think is completely antithetical to what MLK Jr. taught. In fact, I think it was his niece I had a long conversation with, who said, yeah, this is not what my uncle was teaching back then. And it doesn't resolve the issue of racism in this country. So, what is that? This push now to reject color blindness and to actually emphasize a person's skin color. And is there any hope that that aspect or that avenue of ethnic studies is going to resolve this issue of racism? Like in 2020, we saw a lot of people who were white kneeling down before people who happen to be black, saying basically, "I yield everything to you based on the color of our skin."
Well, there's a lot of politics embedded in all those ideas, obviously. And I think what we're trying to say to parents and leaders in communities is be political. This is something that's basic. This is American. This is right up there with freedom and land of opportunity, and hard work and education can lead to success, meritocracy. Uh, so when you inject all these other things and you turn uh, first grade and second grade classrooms into political battlefields, it's probably not going to bring out the outcome people want. And I think there's a time and a place for conversations, and maybe that conversation that you just outlined, Tom, is a conversation that sophomores and juniors in college can have intelligent discussions around. But I don't think it's age appropriate
Hmm.
in elementary school, and I don't
Yes.
think it's appropriate to create foundations for education that basically avoid or prevent or block critical thinking skills and critical decision making in favor of uh, some school or department or teacher bringing his or her own ideology and politics into the classroom and telling little kids that this is the only way.
Yeah.
It can't be the only way. We
No.
have to learn how to discuss, debate, and unpack complex issues. We have to
Yeah.
learn to think about it. It's a nuanced issue. So when it's presented, no pun intended, but in a black and white fashion with no shades of gray, you can't really have a proper, deep, thoughtful conversation about it. And kindergartners and first graders are not really equipped to do that in the first place. So we need to act like adults and do these sorts of things in ways that lead to healthy outcomes for our kids and for our society.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of common sense has gone out the window. You mentioned, act like adults, but the adults, unfortunately, are the ones with this ideology that are controlling these schools, and they are indoctrinating these young children without, you talk about, a diversity of thought and intellectual diversity, which is not happening, of course, in K through 12 any longer, and I think in most schools. So what do you propose, like the THINC Foundation? How do you stem the tide? How do you push against this wave, this large wave, this ideological wave that has swept through these schools? And how do you push back in an effective way that allows these kids to no longer be indoctrinated and that they are taught really common sense things at such a young age? And maybe, as you said, later in college, they can discuss these deeply nuanced and difficult issues. How do you push against this? How do you protect the kids now who are in kindergarten through 12th grade?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. I
Yeah.
think it begins with uh, creating better awareness, helping people understand that if this is in their school district, they have a right as parents to know about it. And if this is in the curricula, they ought to be able to see the curricula. It ought not be developed in secret. If this is in other schools nearby and it might be coming to your school soon, know that, learn that. Go talk to your teachers. Go talk to the principals if the talk with the teacher isn't successful. Bring other parents to school board meetings. Embark on letter writing campaigns. We have tools for this on our website, think.org, THINC. It stands for transparency, honesty, and integrity in the classroom. Who could argue with those ideas? If you're in a state where it's not there, but you think it's inconsistent with American values and basic common sense, well, get involved, take action, because it's part of the fabric of a movement that is unfortunately taking hold in just too many places in our nation, and it's unhealthy. But I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I want to see the opportunity and not get consumed by the problem. So we're not here saying don't teach ethnic studies. That's not the case at all. There's a time and a place for it, and there are elements of it that are fine and healthy and constructive and bring people together. What we don't like is when it's used as a wedge, when it's used to divide children for the sake of politics and ideology or power. You suggested that it's a lot of people that are leading this movement. Well, we don't think it's a lot of people. We think it's a fringe. We think it's a small fringe of people. They have a lot of influence. They're teaching our kids. They have a lot of power. They have, in the state of California, the teachers' unions are deeply embedded in not only the schools but in the political framework. And we think it's imbalanced, but certainly not all teachers act in this way or behave in this way or think in this way. This is a fringe movement. And there are a lot more parents than there are radical teachers, that's for sure. And there are plenty of teachers who have their heart and their values and their principles in the right place. And we think those folks are in a position with more information and better organization to, as you say, push back against this and advocate for something better.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it is by far and away a minority of people who think this way. Just that minority happens to maybe be in a large position of power and pulling the strings on how the rest of the teachers and those underlings, for lack of a better word, are supposed to teach these kids. You mentioned something very interesting too. You call them white adjacent groups. And that would include Asians, which we know are often oppressed even by these universities. And because they're successful, it's based on the fact that they're successful, that somehow they are oppressors. And I want you to really, actually, this next question, talk about the anti-Semitism that is really reared its ugly head. I don't think most of us understood how deep anti-Semitism has been entrenched in our institutions here. But I think the anti-Semitism incidents have risen, I think it's by 2,500% in 2023. And a lot of this is being carried out on our college campuses. This idea that somehow Jewish people are oppressors in this country. And we know just by looking at not that far distant history in this country, the exact opposite has been the case. So how does this correlate? We think of critical race theory as being specifically about African Americans, but it seems to be these other, if you want to label them, these other ethnic groups as well. Anybody who is not maybe African American is somehow an oppressor.
Well, Asian Americans as a group, and they're not a monolith for sure, have had extraordinary success, and many of these cultures and families value greatly hard work and education, and the parents hold down multiple jobs, and they scrap and scrape, and the kids forego after school activities in favor of studies in order to get into great colleges. And we've all read the reports about the colleges that have cut back on the admission for Asians because the levels reached a point where the schools felt it was too much. And how is that possible if they have the best grades and the best test scores? And they were excluded, as Jews were excluded decades ago from many of these institutions because in an interview or culturally they were deemed to not fit in. So that's flagrant, blatant discrimination. And Asian kids are not in these key groups that the liberated ethnic studies like to talk about. Why? Because their success economically,
Mm.
educationally, in a relatively short period of time in the country has been so disproportional. It's founded on hard work, extraordinary hard work. If you look at the stories of some of these kids, but it doesn't fit the narrative. So they're deemed to be white adjacent, which is the height of irony. Similarly, with Hindu Americans, they're extraordinarily successful. I don't know how one could explain the Nigerians that you referenced earlier. That just doesn't fit, so it's probably ignored and not talked about it. But
Exactly.
Jews have been persecuted for thousands of years. We all
Yes.
know the history, and Jewish Americans have made extraordinary contributions to America in many fields. And the idea that Jews are oppressors, my father fled the Nazis, Tom, as a boy in the
Oh.
late 30s with his parents. They came in the height of the Depression.
Oh.
Uh, they had to work extraordinarily hard. My father was the first in his family to go to college. He joined the Army in World War II, was awarded 2 Purple Hearts, had a distinguished career, lots of civic and community service, gave back in an extraordinary way. So when people say that Jews are oppressors, that's ridiculous. It's ignorant. It's another manifestation of the fact that this narrative, this liberated ethnic studies, critical race theory, sorting people by skin color, it doesn't hold up. And there are exceptions to it. There are a lot of exceptions to it. So they start to manipulate the results so that their hypothesis can remain true, but their hypothesis was broken from the very beginning. So it doesn't really matter how much you massage it; it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. I do wonder, and I'm kind of convinced this is kind of the bottom line issue. It comes down, and you mentioned, Marxism earlier, but I do think that because, you also mentioned meritocracy. This is something that, hard work. I don't know if it's necessarily, I think it is the success, but success comes after a long time, years worth of hard work and, earning the merit. And I just think that the CRT, the critical race theory, and the liberated ethnic studies, they're really opposed to those kind of fundamental values that leads to success. And I think it goes back to ultimately that the government is really the giver of all your goods, whether it's healthcare, it's your food, it's your housing. And maybe that's what they're leaning towards. Listen, it's not your God, it's not your own, self introspection or personal responsibility. It's what the government is supposed to allow and not allow it and provide for you. And it seems to me that ultimately that's what they're trying to push here. Do you sense that as well, or am I a little off here?
Well, we have a Chinese American on our advisory council who wrote a book about this subject because he saw, as do many immigrants from former communist countries, from the former Soviet Union, from communist China, from Cuba, from Vietnam. They saw what this Marxist ideology can lead to, and they see the signs of it, the breadcrumbs, in movements like liberated ethnic studies, critical race theory, other things. And they've spoken up about it and they've written about it. So they've seen this movie before.
Hmm.
I I've had conversations with people over the years about things that we all experience in our lives, like flying on an airplane, or heaven forbid, if you need surgery. Uh, who do you want flying the airplane? Who do you want conducting the surgery? Uh, Most of us don't care what that person's ethnic background is, skin color is, religious orientation is, gender is, as long as they're competent, right? We want a competent airline pilot. We want a good surgeon. Um, so if we start making decisions about who gets in to this or that school, who becomes qualified for this or that profession, not based on competence, not based on capability, but based on other factors that have nothing to do with how they'll perform in the job, that probably doesn't lead to a good outcome. And most people when they're asked about it, get that immediately. So when these sorts are manifested in other ways where there's different rules, there's different criteria that have nothing to do with capability, or when kids, in the case of THINC Foundation, are not taught how to think, but they're told what to think
Hmm.
at a very
Yeah.
young age,
Right.
it sets the stage for the kind of problems that we see with the radical encampments and the protest movements on the colleges. They're not out there in support of Palestinians. These protesters, they could care less about that. They're anti-Jewish. They're anti-American. They're anti-democratic values. They're anti-law enforcement, anti-capitalism. They're against a lot of the things that the majority of Americans stand for and believe in. And uh, if you don't like what you're seeing on the college campuses and in other parts of society, you're really not going to like what's going on in too many of our K through 12 schools.
Right, for sure. How do people find out more about you? What's your website for the Think Foundation?
Thank you. We are think.org, THINC, transparency, honesty, and integrity in the classroom. There's lots of information. There's toolkits. There's templates for letters if you want to send a letter to your school. There's information on how to organize other parents. There's lots of great articles that have been written on this subject by people all over the country from all sorts of ethnic groups and backgrounds. If you have a story, email us, tell us your story. If you want to support our work, we would like to scale our work. So please visit our website, think.org, learn about this issue, tell your friends, follow us on social media, like and share the posts. Um, and thank you for leaning in. It's a really important issue.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to amplify this as well. I totally believe in what you're doing because I do believe in the cultural richness of different ethnicities, but we're not to be judged based on those ethnic backgrounds rather than it's the content of our character. And I so appreciate what you're doing, and I hope you have great success. Thanks for getting up early out there in San Diego. You're up
Great.
before my twin brother, who lives, I think, in the Del Mar area. So go knock on his door and wake him up. All
I'll do that. Thanks so
right, thanks
much,
so
Tom.
much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Mitch Siegler is the founder and the CEO of the THINC Foundation, THINC. Mitch, thanks so much. Wow, this is important because I really do think that a lot of us have been duped into believing that these great sounding names, liberated ethnic studies, sounds wonderful, as does critical race theory. You put that word critical in there, it reminds you of critical thinking and those types of skills that are important for us to succeed as individuals. But that's not at all what it is. It actually lumps you not as an individual, but into a group of people. And based on again, I've said this before, that your immutable trait, the color of your skin, that's where everything needs to be judged upon what color skin you are. And based on that, you are either an oppressor or you are being oppressed. And there's nothing you can do about it, nothing whatsoever. And it goes completely against the grain of common sense, logic, and evidence that is out there. And again, I mentioned off the top here, and a lot of people don't realize this because this is buried, but the most successful demographic, when you look at income and college degrees in the United States, are African Americans. And you say, well, that's not true. No, it's a specific group of African Americans, Nigerians, whose skin color is black. Nigerians, and it's all based on their culture, their expectations, their belief in meritocracy, hard work, difficulty, striving for excellency, and the family structure and the parents setting these high bars for their children. And guess what happens when you set a high bar? Many times they reach it because there's a lot of support around them reaching that high bar. That is the Nigerian culture. By no means is Nigeria a perfect nation. That's not what I'm saying. There's a lot of, violence there as well. But the family structure, look into this. Nigeria, Nigerians in the United States, the most successful demographic when it comes to income and college degree. They are not oppressed. In fact, my daughter's favorite professor in college was from Nigeria. So there's a lot of great success, and it's just a very encouraging thing. So don't feel, based on the color of your skin, that you're either oppressed or an oppressor. That is a lie that we're being told in our schools, and most parents, again, are unaware of this, of what liberated ethnic studies teach. And it's no accident, by the way, that they're unaware of it. There's a lack of transparency, and it allows these schools to sneak in politically charged ideologies without parental consent. And in the state of Michigan now, they have now taken away what they call FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, that no longer applies to teachers. Why? Because they don't want to release what they are teaching your kids in Michigan schools. That is a very recent development. And they talk a lot about transparency. We have these, and I just saw some statements on X, very ironically, by some of the far left liberals who are in power right now in the state of Michigan, talking about the importance of transparency. And they are the ones who are being the least transparent. And they are blocking people from getting information, like actively doing that. And yet they're publicly stating these things that they so-called believe in, and it's just not the case. So the majority of parents who are out there, they support teaching children to treat everyone equally. You're the same. You should be treated equally, regardless of your race. But when these schools are pushing this curricula that maybe they don't call it curriculum so they can bury the information, because parents are supposed to have access to the curriculum in the classroom. So sometimes they label these things as training in order to keep that information private and out of parents' frame of mind or understanding, and out of their hands, more specifically. But this curricula is what it is, these lesson plans that prioritize identity over character. They alienate families, and they betray the very values that have historically united Americans. So liberated ethnic studies, it erodes critical thinking. The programs don't teach students to analyze or to question. No, don't question this. They are indoctrinated into accepting a single worldview. And they discourage dissent. If you dissent, you disagree, they will label you something horrible based on that. I've been called names. It doesn't bother me anymore. It used to more than it does now, but I realize this is just an attempt to silence opposition to these radical ideologies. And they'll label opposing views as harmful and dangerous and hateful and all these different names in order to keep you underground in your opinions. And they undermine the intellectual growth and the independence that education really should foster, right? And then you look at the spike in anti-Semitic incidents on campuses. It's not happening in a vacuum. It's the natural result of this framework that vilifies groups based on perceived privilege. Like your success is only because it was given to you. And that's the expectation, that if you're a believer in critical race theory, that you need to be given certain things to be successful. And most successful people do not fall into that category. They don't believe that they should be given anything, that they need to work hard. They need to fight, in a sense, for what their objective is. If they want to be successful in business, they fight hard and just working 16, 17, 18 hours a day. So don't buy into the narrative that these CEOs take naps all day long and don't do any work and put all the work in the backs of their employees. No, they're probably the hardest working individual in the company, because it all depends on them and their decision-making skills and their critical thinking skills. It's this narrative of eternal oppression based on your skin color and your level of success, and justifying hostility toward those who succeed outside of that paradigm, justifying violence and hostility. And we just saw it with the death of this CEO of United Healthcare. The people now that are justifying his death. Even Elizabeth Warren came out and said, listen, you push two people hard, these are sometimes the outcomes. You're pushing them over a cliff. What? Because, listen, I've had procedures denied by insurance companies. In fact, I've had procedures denied by unions, even when insurance companies accepted it. So who really are the oppressors here? You got to think about this and do your own, deep dive to figure it out for yourself. But I have my theories, of course. All right, I want to bring up this is interesting with Donald Trump back in office, and I'll get to some anti-Semitic, plans by Donald Trump in a moment. But I want to talk about her, Gretchen Whitmer, there, and Donald Trump because this was a, I don't know, surprising pivot Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer has made. She's now expressing a lot of willingness to collaborate with President-elect Donald Trump. Lauding his care for Michigan, saying she knows that Donald Trump cares about Michigan, despite years of this heated criticism against him. She said this: "I know Donald Trump cares about Michigan." That was amazing that she would say that after these years of saying that Donald Trump does not care about Michigan. And, this conciliatory tone that she's now, I think it's good that she's doing this, but it is a stark departure from her past rhetoric. She has agreed and she has supported candidates who label Donald Trump a threat to democracy. And she's even said that basically he's a racist. He supports white supremacy. And she said, back in during this speech you're watching out right here, where she was talking about the plot to kidnap her and possibly kill her, she blamed directly Donald Trump for that and said that he's refused very publicly to denounce white supremacy and neo-Nazism, when in fact he has done the exact opposite of it. Repeatedly criticizing his policies and his leadership. And again, she even blamed Donald Trump for leading the effort to kidnap her in 2020, wrongly saying that he supported neo-Nazis. That was not true. And I thought a lot about that this morning. I thought, is it okay to just do that during a campaign? Because that was a campaign. And Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit, also said the same thing that she said here, and all these things about Donald Trump that were false. And a lot of reporters kind of got behind that. And they lauded this statement as well, that Donald Trump is a white supremacist and supports white supremacy. It's not true. Anyway, so now she's got this tone of maybe they're reconciling. Maybe she'll come out and say, what I said was not true. I don't think Donald Trump cares at this point. He just wants to get stuff done, like she says she does as well, and maybe they will. Donald Trump and Gretchen Whitmer, they've got this very contentious history. By the way, they also clashed very publicly over COVID-19 response and, her comments about, his comments about Detroit recently, saying that if Kamala Harris wins, much of the country will look like Detroit, and she took great offense to that. And I thought, well, I hope most of the country doesn't look like Detroit, because Detroit is widely known. Maybe people in Detroit or the politicians are in a bubble and don't understand the perception of Detroit around the country. And that's what Donald Trump is going with. Most people would not want the country to be like the city of Detroit. And that's not wrong to say. It's a city that has been mired in corruption, in poverty, in decay for decades. Seems pretty obvious to most people. I love Detroit. I've said this before. I love the city. I think what they're doing now is great. It's coming back after an emergency manager was placed by a Republican governor because Detroit wasn't going to dig itself out of a hole, so people had to come in, based again on Republican governor's mandate to save Detroit. And thankfully, Mayor Duggan's done a good job ever since. He was opposed to that, but he has followed suit, and they've done a lot of good stuff with their budgets and bringing the major league teams back to the city of Detroit. But anyway, all of that was a ruse to, demonize Donald Trump because they hated the guy just a few weeks ago. That's what Whitmer was saying just a few weeks ago, that she was blasting Donald Trump based on his statement. And, he did call it it was a failure. But he ignoring the city's ranking as one of America's most dangerous cities. That's still the case. So, anyway, so she's been opposed to Donald Trump for a very, very long time. She said some pretty horrible things about him and his followers, that he's, going to jeopardize democratic institutions. But now with Trump regaining the presidency, Michigan voters decisively backing Donald Trump, Whitmer appears to be kind of recalibrating here. Her newfound pragmatism, I think that's what it is, could reflect Michigan's political realities. Donald Trump's economic policies resonate with many residents, including a lot of people in the city of Detroit. Donald Trump has been to Detroit many times, spoken with residents, with pastors. What do they need to succeed? And he seems very willing and ready to help them out in the way that's going to, in the long term, benefit them economically and in other ways. So, is her cooperation here strategic? Is it opportunism or is it genuine bipartisanship? We'll find out. But, she's, I think, planning, of course, to run for president at some point. So we'll find out there as well. But it's maybe a balancing of political survival with her national aspirations, her willingness to work with Donald Trump. It is a very complex dynamics here that are shaping Michigan's and America's political future. So we'll watch this. I'm glad she's doing that rather than what she did the last time he won and just demonized him throughout his presidency. I do think there's a shift. Most Americans have woken up to the disinformation that they've been putting out there about the president-elect, Donald Trump. Let's talk about anti-Semitism again and Donald Trump's desire to combat it. Is on day one, and there's an op-ed that I read this morning was some ideas for Donald Trump to really push back on the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, anti-Jewish rallies and protests and violence that has happened over the past year and a half in this country, and what he can do starting on day one. The shift from the rhetoric to actual results. You look at Donald Trump's 2019 executive order on anti-Semitism, which operationalized the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition. He is not anti-Semitic. In fact, he is a pro-Jewish, pro-Israeli president and president-elect. He's going to update that, and he's going to strengthen that most likely. This includes codifying protections for Jewish students under the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. That is a bill that's been stymied, by the way, by Senate Democrats under Chuck Schumer. They don't want that going through. Why would that be the case? The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. Why is Chuck Schumer opposed to that? I think Donald Trump is going to be an enforcement of existing civil rights laws, such as Title VI, which will hold universities accountable for allowing discrimination to continue under the guise of free expression. That's what they were saying during these very violent protests and a lot of hate speech, saying we need to rid the Jews out of this country and out of Israel, wipe them off the face of the earth. And they said, well, that's just free expression. They wouldn't say that if it was against African Americans. That's the case. They are opposed to quote unquote hate speech, except when we see it play out against Jews on college campuses. Trump should target the root causes of anti-Semitism. And he does. He's planning to dismantle the structures that enable anti-Semitism. Universities permitting civil rights violations risk losing federal funding, while disruptive organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine could see their tax-exempt status revoked. Foreign students promoting hate may also face visa revocations, using powers long dormant under the Joe Biden administration. Let him talk. Remember, Kamala Harris said she sympathizes with these people. And Donald Trump also aims to repeal Biden's DEI mandates. For sure, that needs to happen because DEI mandates work against Jews and anybody who is perceived to be successful in this country. We just talked about that with our guest today. DEI mandates. Critics argue perpetuate anti-Semitism. They're right. Through these divisive identity politics. So Trump's administration is set to root out their harmful ideologies, enforcing policies that prioritize true equality, free speech, and, of course, accountability. And I apologize for my earpiece. It keeps popping up. Has been for a few months. Robust plan, I think, that Donald Trump has. Donald Trump is committed not only to combating anti-Semitism, but really restoring core American values that everybody is created in the image of God. It's individual civil rights for any ethnic group, and he's shown that time and time again. All right, let's talk about these drones that have been popping up on the East Coast. New Jersey lawmakers are demanding urgent action on these mystery drone sightings. You can see it up there. Where are these coming from? The New Jersey skies have become an pretty unsettling stage for these mysterious nighttime drones. State Senator John Bramnick, he's a Republican out of New Jersey. He's sounded the alarm here, and he appeared on one of these networks. And he was urging the Department of Defense to intervene, figure out what these things are, warning that this technology behind this drone incursion is way beyond state officials. They can't figure out. And if the feds don't know what it is, we're in a world of hurt. He's like, this is no joke. Until the Department of Defense steps in, he says, I'm calling for a limited state of emergency. No drones in the sky until we know what is going on. And residents there are reporting drones the size of SUVs, trailing these Coast Guard vessels and circling communities. Who are they? Who's operating these things? Is there a mothership, off the coast here? Jeff Van Drew, he's a congressman as well out of New Jersey, another Republican. He suggested a potential link to an Iranian mothership stationed off the East Coast. Now, that claim was denied by the Pentagon. There's no mothership, they said, off the coast. But Van Drew seemed to look pretty skeptical. He said, listen, the national security stakes here, these are quite severe. And he says, listen, these things need to be shot down if necessary out of the skies here. What are these things? Governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, has been kind of absent. The scheduled emergency meeting, he's been heavily criticized because he didn't show up. The mayor in one of those towns there, his name is Ryan Hurd, he was demanding, listen, where are you, Phil Murphy? This seems to be a crisis. Local law enforcement, the Monmouth County Sheriff, they're calling for a drone ban during the nighttime hours until they figure out what this is. I don't think it's some kid. Or I don't think that's the neighborhood, teenage drone club that are putting these things up in the air. These things are serious and they're huge. Remember, like SUV size. So, and some, I think it was the FBI said, we don't know what they are or where they are from. So federal, state agencies, they're kind of scrambling here for some answers. The DOD needs to act swiftly on this. We shouldn't be the citizens I'm speaking of now, the first line of defense. This is pretty serious stuff. So I do hope they find out what it is. And when they find out what it is, act accordingly. And if there is an Iranian mothership off the coast, let us know. We'd like to know that as well and do something about it. All right. That's the headlines for today. I think we got some time for some comments. If there's, let's bring them up. I think we'll go with three comments right now on Tom Jordan Live. Let's start off with R. Paulus, CRT, DEI, constructs and fruit of leftism, predatory, assaultive, destructive, tyrannical. That's absolutely, you nailed it, R. Paulus, and they claim it's all the opposite of all those things. But think about tyrannical and authoritarianism. It only allows one point of view, one perspective. There's no diversity of thought here, no intellectual curiosity. You can't ask questions that maybe go against that narrative, or you will be labeled maybe a member of a hate group, or you'll be labeled something else, like you in fact are an authoritarian because you don't agree with our view of critical race theory, that you are in fact an oppressor. And the fact that you're denying you're an oppressor is more evidence that you are an oppressor. That's their line of thinking here. So it's a very hard argument based on their very myopic view of what racism is, and that you have to be judged on not the content of your character, but on your skin color. That's how they view it. And unfortunately, these lesson plans are being taught to, kindergartens all the way through 12th grade. Of course, in the universities as well. That's been taught in our colleges for a long time. But yeah, you nailed it. Thanks so much. Good to see you and hear from you again. All right, one more. Let's do two more. We'll start with this one. Taz is back. Hey, Taz. Wow, teachers are exempt from FOIA. Yes, teachers are supposed to be disseminators of information, yet hide it from parents. How ironic. Yeah, that's the way they do it. And it's sad that was what came down, and the judge ruled on this. I think it was the Supreme Court in Michigan ruled that, yeah. Remember, the Michigan Supreme Court now is a leftist-leaning Supreme Court. The majority, I think it's 4-3 now, are leftist progressives. And they've decided that, teachers don't have to share their lessons plan. You can't ask for, you can't FOIA the teacher's emails to maybe even your kid and the students, or to other teachers regarding curriculum or lesson plans or training is what they're calling some of this curricula now, in order to hide it from parents even further. So yeah, they're now exempt, just like the governor is, and just like members of the state legislature are exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. You can't know what they have and what they're teaching your kids. Thanks so much. Yeah, it's surprising. It's wrong. All right, one more here. Let's bring up Charles Beatty is back. Hey, Charles. Democrats love bipartisanship when they lose power, but want nothing to do with it when they have majority. Isn't that the case? It is sad. I mean, that's why I do prefer, Charles, that Governor Whitmer now says she's going to cooperate and try to work with Donald Trump, as opposed to how she dealt with him the last time around in 2018 when she was elected governor, and then 2019 when she was brought into office. She was highly, but again, that was a political time and very politically charged environment as it is today. But at least they're pulling back. But it's very, I think, disingenuous. The things that she said about Donald Trump and Donald Trump supporters, if she really believed those things, she would not be working with him. And if she truly believed that Donald Trump is like anti-Semitic and racist through and through, and that he's a threat to democracy and he's a dictator and he's, equivalent to a Nazism, if she really believed that, would she really be working with him? So it comes down to, again, I was thinking about this morning. It comes down to, and I can see some Democrats saying, yeah, but we were just campaigning. So we say those kinds of things. I think it was Kamala Harris that said that back in 2020 I think it was on Steve Colbert show. And she said, well, that was just during a campaign, or that was during a debate. That's why I said that. Basically acknowledging that what you say during a campaign or during a debate is a lie. It's not true. And I feel like that's what is going on here. They didn't really believe all those things, but they certainly wanted to portray Donald Trump in that vein so that he would lose the election and America would hate him. And we can see now that Americans aren't buying that shtick anymore, and I think that's what she's recognizing as well. So, all right, let's come back to reality. I'll kind of, put my good face on now and just cooperate with someone who really isn't a hateful individual. He's kind of cool, actually, very, very kind and nice, and actually his policies align with traditional American values, and the majority of Americans actually like his policies a whole lot. So, okay, let's work with him. It's good for Michigan, is what she's saying now, that Donald Trump cares about the state of Michigan. He does. And I think she's either finally recognizing it or always knew it, but just pretended that she thought he was dangerous to her state. All right. Thanks for your comments. And as always, thanks for watching today. It's always a privilege to have you. Remember, you can catch us on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, on YouTube, on X, and on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. And I'm going to get this thing fixed. I'm tired of it. Hopefully I will do something about it. Hold me accountable if you would. We'll see if I fix it by tomorrow. Thanks so much. God bless you. We'll see you back here 9 a.m. Eastern on Tom Jordan Live.